Welcome to the Teachers Talkin' podcast, hosted by Dustin Tatro and Ghazali Abdul Wahab. In this podcast, we discuss all things education and teaching, from innovative teaching methods to challenges to strategies and much, much more. In this discussion or roundtable-based podcast, we bring in educators from all around the world to talk about a variety of education topics so that we can support as many teachers as possible. We want this to be a place of inspiration, personal and professional development, and simply a place where we can elevate education together. Welcome to Teachers Talkin'.
Welcome to episode 14 of Teachers Talking. I'm Ghazali, and I'm today with my co-host, as usual, Dustin, who is actually one of our guests today. So this is a very special episode, okay? So the co-host is now the guest. Yeah. So we are excited to have you join us for this insightful discussion on self-paced learning, part 2. And today we are joined by an exceptional educator, Samantha Ortiz. Okay, she and Dustin Tatro who will be sharing their experiences and insights with us on the topic of navigating self-paced learning perspectives from the classroom. Doesn't that sound interesting? And our focus question will be on how does the self-paced model enhance student learning experiences in both elementary and secondary classroom. But before we dive in, let's find out more about our guest today. Samantha, could you give us a brief overview of your background in education and your experience with self-paced learning in the classroom?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so excited. So I've been teaching now 14 years, and it's all been in primary or elementary. I taught first grade for 4 years in Florida. And then I moved to Northern Virginia and jumped into fourth grade, which was very different. And I've been teaching fourth grade ever since. And then the pandemic hit. And I think like everybody else, we're looking for tools and ways to figure this out and be successful and survive all at the same time with teaching in this space. And I came across the Modern Classrooms Project, and I just kind of jumped head first without even thinking about it twice. And I've now been doing Modern Classrooms style teaching for about 4 years now. And I continue to teach fourth grade. My students are majority English language learners in my classroom. And I do it in my math classroom. And I've actually begun implementing in my science and social studies because the kids asked for it.
Well, that must be good. I mean, if the kids ask for it, then you're doing something right?
Yeah.
So, and Dustin, so we've had 14 episodes together. So now's your chance to really showcase who you are. And if you look at Dustin, he's wearing his Darth Vader hat on and his Darth Vader t-shirt, because we're actually recording on May the 4th. And you all know what May the 4th is. It's what, Dustin?
Star Wars Day! May the 4th be with you.
Yes. All right, Dustin, take it away. Tell us more about yourself and your obsession with Star Wars.
Well, we're not going to talk about my obsession with Star Wars here. That's probably for some other kind of podcast. But so I've been an educator for 18 years. I was also an assistant principal for 8 years. I teach high school English language arts, and I taught for a couple years in Illinois, and then I moved to Los Angeles, where I taught for 10 years, and then I came back to Illinois and worked in Chicago. And so, and I also spent 8 years as an assistant principal. And so very similar to Samantha, when COVID happened, I was an assistant principal, and I was told that I was going to be in charge of all asynchronous learning. And I was kind of like, what is that? And like, what are we going to do? And I, went searching for podcasts, just trying to figure out like anything that I could find to start learning more so that I could support my teachers and my students. And so I found this podcast, The Cult of Pedagogy, and this episode happened to be with Kareem Farah, who is the CEO and co-founder of Modern Classrooms Project. I was out walking with my dog, and when I was done, I came home and immediately got onto their website and started their free course. And for me, that's been a part of my journey ever since. So when I went through the mentorship program to learn how to do self-pacing, I was an assistant principal. And so I went through it making self-paced professional developments for my staff. And then after that year, I decided I wanted to step out of leadership and take a break from that and go back into the classroom. And I spent the next 2 years implementing self-pacing in the classroom with 11th and 12th graders. I also mentor teachers. I have mentored teachers in Modern Classroom, which is super cool. I review applications for Distinguished Educators, and I've been working as a partnership consultant with Modern Classrooms as well. So I go in and observe teachers in action. I collaborate with teachers to help them with their implementation. And I lead professional developments for leaders and teachers as well, all around the self-paced model. So I'm super excited to be a guest today and talk about my experiences with self-pacing and why I believe that this is, without a doubt, the way that teachers should be shifting their teaching practices in education.
That's awesome. So let's just dive straight into it. So Dustin mentioned a word there, shifting. So now shifting entails, or it tells me that it's something that is different from the traditional norm that we are used to in the classroom. So Samantha, could you tell us what's the difference between what you do now and how things are run in a traditional classroom?
Yeah, a lot of differences. So traditional classroom, you're imagining, right, the teacher at the front of the room giving their lecture, their focus lesson, and then the students are off after that working on something or being assessed. And then the next day you move on to lesson 2. And it's this idea that you're really stuck with, Monday is lesson 1, Tuesday is lesson 2, Wednesday, and so forth. And with this structure, I plan with my 4th grade team, and we plan all of our units together and we pace everything out. And then I take what we do and then I make it work with my structure. So rather than me being at the front of the room, we might do a quick warm up, or we might do just kind of like, hey, updates for the day. And then the kids are off looking at their personal tracker that they have that tells them where they're at. And we have one on the board that's student facing that they can see. And I have become copy pasted onto all of their screens with my instructional videos. So it takes me out of the front of the room, and it also takes away that idea of like, I hold all the knowledge and I'm going to give it to them. It's the knowledge is out there and they're going to be looking for it and collaborating for it and figuring it out together. So it's very different than definitely how I was taught in school with teachers sitting in rows and, having them at the front of the room. Whereas now I'm everywhere really on their computers. And I'm also in the back of the room now at my table working with kids on really targeted skills. And that's like the biggest shift when someone comes into my room of take a look around. You're going to notice this doesn't look like, everybody else's classroom.
Yeah, that's that sense of you're doing something different, something unique. So Dustin, with this approach of teaching, right, what have you observed? How does it affect your students?
So at first it was a struggle for the students because it's such a different approach than what they're used to. But after a lot of just working with them, and I think that's one of the best pieces of the model is how much collaborating you do with your students to help you, especially at the beginning, to help you figure out what works best. And that's one of the things I really love about the model is how flexible it is. Really like working with my students on why this is the best way for them to learn and building up their confidence to be able to do work independently, because our students are so dependent on their teachers for everything that they do. And so at first there's a lot of like, why can't you just go do this like everybody else? Why can't you just stand up there and talk? Well, for some of those kids, that's the cop out, right? Like that's the way that they can skate by and not really have to do anything. And I think a lot about the times in which I was teaching traditionally, and I'm going over explicit instruction from the front of the room, and I do check for understandings. I'm asking like 2-3 students, and I really only know that those students are with me, and everybody else who I don't get a chance to ask. And you can't stop and pause and ask 30 kids the same question to see if everybody is with you or not. But in this model, you can. And that's the biggest shift, is taking that explicit instruction, putting it into an instructional video where you embed checking for understanding questions, and you include guided notes for your students to make sure that everybody actually understands material before they actually move on, instead of me as the teacher forcing everyone to move on at the pace that I have set. And so, like Samantha said, one of those big keys is now, since everybody is accessing their explicit instruction on their own, I can target very specific skills and with very specific students by having small groups and one-on-one conversations with kids. So quite frankly, this is the only time I've taught where I felt like I was truly meeting every single student where they were, whether they're students who have IEPs, whether they are students who are advanced, whether they are students who are on grade level or below grade level, or even if they are students who are absent a lot. I have the opportunity of actually making sure every single one of those students is learning the things that they need to learn and moving on, at a better pace than the pace that I set, or that some school curriculum or some school pacing guide sets.
All right. So that's really interesting. Then you don't really relinquish control over your classes, do you? Although it looks like the students are doing all the work. So the link to that is for Samantha, is a very important question. I think all teachers want to know. How do you see this approach promoting academic success in students?
Oh my gosh. I'm like nodding my head as Dustin is talking. Like I feel like a bobblehead because I'm just agreeing with all of it. And my kids are 9 and 10. And you think of them as like the littles of the school world. And I feel like if they can handle it, man, like we all have to be jumping on board with this.
Mhm.
But in terms of academic success, I mean, it's kind of wild to see the difference. I teach an AM class and a PM class, and my AM class is language arts, and we have to go by this set curriculum, and it doesn't really allow for a lot of flexibility. So that's very much more traditional, unfortunately, than my PM class, which is my math, my science, my social studies. And I can see such a difference when it comes to how they're doing and how they're interacting with each other. I'm pulling teeth with my morning class to collaborate with each other, to show their work, to do all these things. But my PM class comes in, and it's some of the same kids actually from the morning. And it's just like a switch goes off, and they're all getting to work, and they're showing their work, and they're working with each other. And it's become this culture that we've set from day one and end of August. And I actually had one of my assistant principals came in 2 days ago for an informal observation. And one thing she mentioned, she was like, oh my gosh, I overheard a kid saying, wow, we might actually get to lesson 3 today. Yes. And like, what? I don't think there's a lot of teachers that can say their kids are excited to get to the next lesson, and they're excited that they mastered it, and they know that I'm very strict when it comes to that part. They can collaborate on everything, but when it comes to that check piece, it's got to be by themselves. They've got to show work. So they know they have to really show up for that. And you've got 9 and 10-year-olds who are showing amazing amounts of work, and they're able to explain it, and they're helping other students. So, I mean, clearly that's directly translating when they're going to go now take a unit test, and I can see the difference. And I think, especially because I have those 2 different groups, I'm really seeing it this year, like the stark contrast of how they're doing academically, really relating to the structure and how they're working together, for sure.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I think
do
we
you
want
guys-
to build off that too, because I think, one of the core pieces of the modern classroom self-pacing model is mastery checks, which in kind of a traditional teaching sense, we often talk about like exit tickets at the end of a day's lesson, and the mastery checks that we give in a modern classroom is very similar to that, except it's tied to a lesson, and those lessons don't have to be day by day. Some of my lessons were designed for students to take 2 or 3 days to work on. So I didn't have to worry about like Monday is this one thing, and then I have to assess them on Monday, and then Tuesday is this next thing, and I have to assess them on Tuesday. Instead, as I craft these lessons, my students do a mastery check at the end of the lesson. And if they don't pass that mastery check, for me, that was like an 80% threshold. So you have to get an 80%. If you don't get an 80%, you get feedback and you go through a revision process, and you don't actually move on to the next lesson until you reach that 80%. And so when you're talking about the academic side of impact on this, right, it really helps to ensure that all your students are actually learning and doing well. So, and it's just such a scaffolded step-by-step that I've seen it have impacts not only on the things that I'm doing in class, but then translate over to larger, school-wide assessments or statewide assessments as well.
Can I add something? So you said
Yes, please.
about, oh gosh, the kids, not being able to move on, obviously, before they master it. And the first thing I heard in my head was, a teacher saying, well, but you've got to get through all the content. You got to get through all the lessons. Like I have a mastery check next Friday, or a test, and they have to know all the things. And I'm just thinking in my head, like, but were they getting all of it before in the traditional style? And I know, 14 years in, I know for a fact, we were just pushing through. You're just pushing through the lessons, hoping you're touching on everybody and everybody's getting a little bit, and that you're leaving kids behind. Yep. So it's in the traditional style, you're losing more kiddos behind, whether they're absent or they're just not there, like, mentally there that day. Whereas this, you truly know exactly what they know and what they might not know. And then on that unit test, okay, that kiddo, they didn't master lesson 4. So on question 5, when it's asking about that skill, let's see how they do. And then we can go back and we can revise that particular skill. And exactly what they know. You have so much more of a grip on what they've had access to.
Okay, so I'm hearing a lot of things about this modern classroom, a lot of strategies, a lot of techniques. So I'm going to ask both of you the same question, but Samantha first. Can you highlight to us and to the listeners, what are 1 or 2 of your favorite strategies or most effective techniques that you use in the classroom that you've seen really this has impact on your students?
Only 2. No. So I would say 1, which I got from Modern Classroom, the one idea was Open Table, which it's I think of it as like a almost like a doctor's office where if the doctor's available to see you, you can go in and be seen. So I sit at a table in the back, and I have these like red stools, and the kids know that if a red stool is available, that they can come over and ask for help. And it's, the amount of advocating that they're learning that they've never had to do before is so much higher in our room. There is no raising their hands in my math class. And when they come to me, I'll ask them and I'll say, okay, you need help with, X. Great. Who else did you ask before you came to me for help? And they know that they have to ask at least 3 or 4 other people for help before they can come to me. And by this point in the year, it's May, they know. So a few of them will come over and they're like, oh, well, I meant to ask so-and-so. And I said, okay, well, now you got to go back to me. And we've also started using lesson experts. So if a kiddo shows really great work on a mastery check, I'll ask them, hey, would you mind being an expert for this lesson and helping other students? And then we'll talk about what that would look like. And it's not just saying the answer's 4, it's how do we get there? And then their name goes on the board, and the kids know that they can go to them first. And I try to pick kiddos that maybe aren't always the ones that are always voicing and always, answering questions, so that they're getting a chance to say, oh, I know how to do this. And I've got the confidence to help others. And a lot of the kids that came in from third grade, and the teachers were saying, okay, they really struggled with math. They're really shy at this point in the year. Like, they're the ones that are passing, they're they're above pace, or they're past pace. They're lesson experts. They're the ones helping other people, and it's like a totally different kid by the end of the school year. So open table and having lesson experts are huge in my room for sure.
Oh, yes, that sounds really powerful. Dustin, over to you.
There's so many things that we could talk about. I mean, but I'll say chunking is probably the thing that was most impactful. And it's not to say that I wasn't like chunking and scaffolding things before I learned how to do a self-paced model, but it forced me to chunk even further than I ever was. As a high school English teacher, we're focused on needing to write a lot of essays. And I'd say that's actually where I saw some of the biggest impact, both for students and for me, because I started to chunk my writing process into something so much smaller than what I had ever done before, where I was legitimately using the rubric that I was going to use at the end of an essay. I was using the components of that along the way. So my kids had to, for example, watch a video about what is a thesis statement, how is that different from topic sentences. They would do some practice work so that they could identify proper thesis statements or rewrite proper thesis statements. They would do a mastery check so that they could identify and actually, I take that back. They didn't even do a mastery check. All their practice was around identifying, and then their mastery check was actually writing a thesis statement for their essay, where then I would meet with them one-on-one, read it, grade it on the same rubric that I'm going to use at the end of the essay before, and then give them feedback. And if they mastered it, they were able to then move on to the next step, the next lesson, which was then all about topic sentences. And if they didn't, then they got feedback on that thesis right then and there. Sometimes we revised it together. Sometimes I sent them back off on their own to work on it, right? Like whatever that might be, but I needed to approve it before they would move into that next lesson. And then we did that with topic sentences. So I approved all of their topic sentences before they moved on to finding their evidence. And I approved their evidence before they moved on to writing analysis, right? It was like just this much more streamlined approach. And because I was approving their writing along the way, by the time I then get to the end where I have a completed essay, I've essentially already approved the majority of the paper. It saved my time in grading at the end because now I'm mostly just looking for organization, structure, grammar, that sort of thing. And I'm not looking for all those key components because I've already worked with the kids throughout. It also helped from having to create days to do a full revision process because we were writing and revising and writing and revising, and we were taking it in such a step-by-step fashion. And prior to that, I would have been doing something like, first we're doing the outline, and then you're gonna write your first draft, and then from your first draft, you're gonna do a peer edit, right? And it just wasn't as chunked as what I did with this. And I could say that chunking helped me apply to even reading novels, for example. We read novels and it takes us so long to read novels. We're focused on so many things. You could talk about anything and everything when you read a book. And I really started to focus on each chapter was we would look at one specific thing. We'd look at close reading for a chapter and nothing else. Or we would look at how symbolism was used in a chapter and nothing else. Right. So this model really, really helped me take what I was doing and bring it way down and scaffold it for students so they could really, truly have like a step-by-step in their learning rather than throwing so much at them at once, which is just what we do naturally because one, standards are massive. There's a lot of stuff that is involved in any type of learning standard. And then two, like, that's what we're taught to do because it's like you have to get through all of this content by the end of the year. Well, students need to be able to develop skills before they can even start to understand any content. So by doing this approach, I probably got through more than I've ever gotten through, quite frankly, because even in a self-pacing, there's still a lot of structure. Like this isn't where you just give students full autonomy to go off and do work all by themselves, right? There's still structure that's involved in it. There's still a process.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of things going on in the background during the lesson, even after the lesson with your exit tickets and all this. So there seems to be a lot of structure, although it may look like the students are doing everything, but there's a lot of structure inbuilt into your technique, your methodology. So all this, the way that you guys are talking, you make it sound really easy, but I'm sure it is not easy. So because you have to be trained in order to do this this self-pacing, right? So Samantha, what are some of the challenges that you face when you first began or when you first started applying this, and how did you overcome these challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially for elementary teachers that are teaching all the subjects, and we're teaching all of it, and it's like, okay, how do I how do I do all of the subjects and all of the standards and all of these things? One is don't, and just choose one piece at a time. I think math tends to be, from what I've seen, the easier kind of access point, because you're very easily able to kind of pick out those very concrete skills for the kids. So taking it very small chunks at a time, like the way you would do it with the kids, doing it for yourself that way too, and going in very small chunks, which is what I did to start. Also, being like, I'm a singleton at my school, so I'm the only one that does this. There's some teachers now that are like, "Ooh, that sounds interesting. Tell me more about it," which is great. But when it comes to when we go to our CTs or our team meetings for planning, I'm still planning with the rest of the team in a very traditional way. So then taking that and saying, okay, now I have to go back and figure out, okay, how do I make that work for my room? And I can see a lot of teachers saying, oh, I don't know about that. That's going to be so much extra time. And there is some time that's definitely needed for the front loading piece. But once you do a unit, it becomes so much more part of just how you plan. And you kind of just get into this groove. And I think it's just taking that first step and saying like, okay, the first unit is going to be messy, and it's going to be a little awkward, and it's going to be a little uncomfortable, and that's okay. What lesson isn't a little uncomfortable and awkward being in front of the kids? With the instructional videos, you get to edit it and you get to make it exactly what you need it to be. There's no kid yelling about how they need a Band-Aid in the middle of the lesson. There's nobody talking about their favorite soccer player, which happens all the time in my room. So it's so much more of a targeted video where they can pause and rewatch. And with my particular kiddos, we have a lot of absenteeism that happens, and it's for long periods of time. So, and especially even with the pandemic and post-pandemic, kids are getting sick and, they're out for the week. And a week in elementary school, because that's all I know, is that could be a whole unit sometimes. So it's kind of this idea of there's challenges, but the challenges could also be seen as strengths too, where yes, it can be difficult making, those 4 or 5 videos for your math lesson, but now they're made and they're done. And that you're good. Like now I can actually focus on science and social studies because math was done 2 years ago. And I can go back and tweak things here and there, but the heavy lifting part is over. So I can see teachers, being concerned about time and things, but it's almost like put in that beginning piece and it's going to be so worth it later for the days that you're out, for the days that the kids are out. Like I'm probably the favorite sub plans in the building because the kids just know what to do and they go do it. And the teacher just has to make sure everybody is safe and doesn't leave the room or anything. So it's this piece of yes, but regular teaching is hard too. So it's kind of like choosing our hard and then knowing that like what this one hard is going to be so much more worth it in the end. And that's, I think that to me is one of the biggest things. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. I mean, I totally understand where you're coming from, and I hear you. Definitely, teachers who want to implement innovative strategies, they need a lot of support. And I think, Dustin, you're the best person to ask this. How can schools and school leaders and administrators give teachers like Samantha the support that they need to be successful in the classroom implementing this new strategy?
I think for one, it's getting to know what the teachers are doing, right? So like, and I would say this, whether you're doing a self-pacing model or a traditional model or anything in between, right? Knowing the models that your teachers are using, why they're using them, why they're effective for them, and being in the classroom is probably the main things, right? So often we get into these schools and teachers only have leaders in the classroom a couple times a year, and a lot of times they're for formal evaluations and reviews and things like that. And the truth is that like these, if as a leader you are not up to date on the most current practices and you're stuck in the things that we've been doing for hundreds of years, then it's also a challenge for you to, one, see the positive side of those things, and two, to support your teachers. So I think being in the classroom, talking with students, meeting with the teachers one-on-one, and like actually getting to know what's happening, why they're doing what they're doing, how that's impactful. I think that's just goes such a long way. And then a leader who's, truly ambitious and wants to grow and develop and wants to be on, the front lines of disrupting education, I would tell them they also should go through this model. I mean, at least, Modern Classrooms starts with a free course. And if I was a leader in a school and I had even just one teacher who was using this model, I would go through the free course just so that I could get a great understanding of what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing it, what's involved in it, how is it different from what we've been doing, and thinking about how it still aligns to school goals, right? And I think that that's really about observations, conversations, collaborations. Yeah.
All right, so I'm hearing that it's not just the teacher involved. Like Dustin mentions, all this extra support that the school needs to also anchor in for the teachers as well, in order for this to be really successful. Looking from the student's perspective, if I'm in a self-paced classroom, right? So, and I have a class of like 30 students, 30 friends in my class, and there's only one teacher, and we're all doing our own things, and then I need help, then my friends need help. And how then do you, so this is a question for both of you, how do you ensure equitable access to all your students so that everybody gets the help that they need?
It's a great question. So for me in my room, I'm just imagining my class right now. I'm just like visualizing all of them working together. And the other day I just kind of sat back and watched them. Sometimes I'll do that and just kind of observe and how they're collaborating and how they're working together. And with my room, I don't have very many IEPs, but I do have a very high majority of my class are English language learners. So they also work with our ESOL teacher. And they get a lot of accommodations with like read aloud on things. And they do need extra support when it comes to language. And I was also an ESOL teacher for 3 years. So I have that background as well with supporting them. So a lot of what I do with my room, I use a lot of software like Quizzes and Edpuzzle. I've just started dabbling with Screencastify. So learning and researching and finding out about these ed tech tools that can help. So my kiddos that do need the things read aloud to them before in a traditional model, you're running around just running around, you feel like with your head cut off because you're trying to read everything out loud for Susie and Billy and Johnny and Jimmy, and everybody needs help. And then it's like, well, you can't ask your friend because that's a class assignment and that's cheating and oh goodness. Whereas now with a lot of these ed tech tools, it's read aloud to them. So that takes like this huge burden off of teachers who might have students with IEPs for read aloud, or if they have ESOL babies in their room that need read aloud. That's a huge access part in my room, at least, with having that read aloud portion. But then also them being able to choose who they work with is also, I mean, it's more of a social emotional piece too, but they're able to decide like, am I in a place today to work with someone else, or am I just going to work solo today? And that's okay too. So they have so many choices that may seem a little like, oh, everybody's doing something different when you come in, but it is very structured, like you said, where you could work alone, or you could be listening to the read aloud of that if you need it, or you could go grab manipulatives in the corner if you need that, or if you've asked everybody and you need more help, you can come to Open Table with me and we're going to work on it. Or you can go rewatch that teacher video because maybe you were in a bad mood yesterday and you got into a fight with your bestie and you weren't really paying attention, because that happens too. And they can rewatch all the things. So there's so many different, I feel like, access points in the room that they can kind of choose from, and they get to decide, and they have to have the agency to say, well, that's what I need today to be successful. And it gives me a lot of time to say, hey, you're looking a little off today. Like, what's going on? And I can have a 10-15 minute conversation and the class is still going. Like, they are still learning, they are doing fractions or measurement or whatever it is. And I'm now able to know, why is this kid not working? And I don't have to just leave them alone in the corner with their head down because I got to get through my lesson. So I feel like there's just this crazy amount of accessibility available to all of them in so many different ways.
And Dustin?
Yeah, I mean, Samantha hit on so much, almost everything.
So many things.
I think it starts with the culture that you create in your classroom. It starts with, for me, I open the year with a unit 0. Actually, I open the year and I open post winter break with a reminder of unit 0, where we establish how is our classroom going to run? What are my expectations in that classroom? What are our routines and procedures in the classroom? And that's all set up front loaded. And from there, I really teach my students how to collaborate, because the truth of the matter is, so much schooling is done in isolation, and I just don't understand that. We ask so much of our students to do so many things independently, and that's not the world that we live in. It's not the workforce that any of us go into. Like, we all collaborate all the time, and if we don't know something, we look something up. The idea of even taking a test through rote memory is ridiculous, because that's just, no one has to do that at all in the real world. Why do we ask that of kids of any grade level? So for me, when you talk about access and helping students, like, I teach my students to collaborate. I teach them what collaboration is and what collaboration isn't. We use a public pacing tracker, so students can always see where they are as an individual, but they can also see where other students are. And I teach them to use that tracker so they know who to collaborate with. I can look at it and see who's on the same lesson that I'm on, and I can go and work with those students. Or I can see that I'm struggling on a lesson and I can look at who's already mastered it, and I can go get help from those students. And so it really builds this sense of independence and ownership for students in their learning. And then, very similar to Samantha, I have a 3 before me policy. Like, I expect collaboration. My students collaborate on everything other than their independent mastery checks. Like, that's the one time that I need to see that you as an individual student learned the material. But if it helps you to learn the material on your own, you can do that. If it helps you to learn the material with just one partner, you can do that. And if it helps you to work in a small group, you can do that too. The kids watch videos together, they do their practice work together. It really encourage collaboration. And then with the 3 before me policy, they're going and they're asking each other. And then if they go and ask 3 students and 3 students can't answer their question, now I have 4 students that I can work with at one time. I have the availability of going and meeting with a student one-on-one who's been absent for 2.5 weeks. And I didn't have that chance when I was teaching in a traditional setting, right? But once we do our warm-up and I go over announcements and I release students into self-paced work time, I actually have the chance to go and sit down one-on-one with students and make sure they're okay. Like Samantha said, I can do social, emotional, and wellness checks with students. I can allow students to have breaks without them actually missing anything. I can sit with a student who's been gone for a long period of time and see what they accomplished when they were gone, if they accomplished anything, and then I can just have them pick up where they left off. It's so much easier. And we also use a system of lesson and like lesson activity classifications, which means that I have a variety. It's more differentiation. I have a variety of things that kids can do, but I have very specific things that all students need to do in order to be successful. And then I have work that's beyond that. So for a student who's been absent for 2 weeks, I have very specific work they have to do, and they don't need to worry about any of the additional pieces. They just need to do the very basics so that they can do the very basic skill.
Wow, so it's very, very, I see that it's very, very structured. It's a progression, although it's at their own pace, but in the end, they achieve what they need to do to meet the standards. So final words, Samantha, is there any additional insight or advice that you would like to share with educators who are considering or even currently implementing self-paced learning in their classrooms?
Oh gosh, yeah, I would say do it. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to jump in. Again, take it one piece at a time, one lesson at a time. Also, not reinventing the wheel. So if you have a team and you meet with your team and you have resources, don't try to reinvent all the things. If my team came up with a slide deck of, let's say, word problems for math, well, that slide deck is now going to become my practices and my mastery checks. It's just going to be printed differently than how the other teachers are going to use them. But I'm not now spending hours at home trying to find all these new resources. So use what you already have. You probably already have amazing lesson slide decks. You probably already have great exit tickets that maybe you'll just shorten or you'll reword or you'll print them differently. But try not to think of it as starting from scratch, and try to think of, I'm already really good at what I do, and I'm just going to do it a little bit differently now. And I have the things and I can just tweak as I go.
Wow, that's awesome advice. Really, I like that. It's about the multiplier effect. Don't try to do things on your own, right? Always use your team members, trust each other. Yeah. Dustin, how about your take?
I would say the biggest challenge that I would say in making this type of a shift is the planning, because everything in this type of a model needs to be pre-planned and pre-front loaded, and that does take a lot of time, and I think that's one of the things that scares people away. However, by planning ahead, I no longer was walking into school going, what am I doing today? Or what am I doing next week? I always knew what I was doing. My students always knew what they were doing. There was never any surprise about when there was a test or when a paper was due, right? Because it's known well ahead of time for everybody. And by spending the time planning early, it created personal time for me later. So I would say that using this type of a model created a sense of balance that I really needed in my career. I stopped going home exhausted all the time because I'm putting out way less fires because I can work with kids instead of having to stop what I'm doing at the front of the room all the time to address different things. And as you know, there's a lot of things that we need to address when we're standing at the front of the room. And that's why it often takes us so long to get through things, right? So to me, it's worth putting in the time to front load. And then like Samantha said earlier, when you put that time in and you create a good instructional video, because they are very skill-based, you now have a video about that skill forever. And so I can make tweaks in the future, but once I create that stuff, it's now good to go. And the only planning I'm doing in the future is making slight adjustments. Every once in a while, I'll re-record a video because I didn't like something, or I left something major out, or I learned something new that really needs to be applied to it, right? But those are normal teacher things. And so I would say embrace the change, which is something we're generally very scared of, to do something better for your kids. And something better for you. It's going to create better balance for your students. It's going to create better learning for your students. It's going to create better independence and ownership for your students. And it's going to do the same thing for you as an educator. It's going to create more time for you. You're going to get back to enjoying teaching because you're going to actually spend more time with your kids. You're going to spend more time building relationships. And the more you can build those relationships, the more students are going to trust you and want to learn from you. So there's so many connected pieces in this type of model that are so beneficial. But I just don't want to shy away from the fact that, like, it's also hard to make that kind of a change. But you can either live in the misery that so many people are living in, or you can take the challenge of making a change, and I guarantee you're going to find something better on the other side.
Wow, both of you are just so inspirational. I think you would definitely put in more things for teachers to think about to improve their classroom, to improve their pedagogy, their methodology. And I think it's definitely something worth trying out. And I think our listeners have gained a lot from listening to the both of you today. So I want to thank both Samantha and Dustin for their valuable contributions to this episode. Just information, our last episode of season 1 will be out on June the 3rd. Okay, so don't forget to like, subscribe, review, and share the podcast with your fellow educators. So with that, I wish everybody a good day, good night, depending on wherever you are.
See you, everybody.
Bye.